Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton, and this is Family Life in the North Country. And our topic today, I'd like to talk about family health. Family health, it's something we hear and read about a great deal, but look at it another way. A wholesome family means that people probably have better health, they have a longer life, and they avoid a great many medical costs. There are all kinds of research papers that document that people in family life are better off than people who are divorced or even who've never married. Now, most often the social scientists develop polarities. They think in terms of polar opposites, but there are a lot of gradations about that. In other words, there are a lot of degrees of wholesomeness, if we can put it that way, along the way. And speaking of along the way, one old friend of mine used to say that all the way to heaven is heaven itself. Well, that's challenging. So let's look at it and say all the way to being a wholesome family is a good thing. So, talking about a wholesome family, let's talk about strong families. And somebody's going to say, well, you've talked about that before. Well, that's true. I've talked about that before, but I believe that just like a good farmer, he may plow the same field more than once, and most of us would like to eat more than once. So we've had a good meal. Maybe it's time to have another one. So here are the characteristics of strong families, wholesome families. And I share them because any one of us can improve. Common today to start talking about communication. So let's mention communications. They're not put downs. In good families, one person is not thriving on another person's weaknesses or faults, and we all have them. They're not denigrating statements. They're not embarrassments. Not quite the contrary. In good families, wholesome families, people usually are supportive. They're complimentary. It reminds me of, remember those magic words? At least some of you can. We learned as a child. Thank you, and if you please. How often do you hear that today? But not only in words do we have communications going on, we also have communications going on constantly with our manner, with our being, how we dress, how we look, how we choose to look, right in the middle of our family. It may seem a little strange, but as a marriage counselor, I sometimes hear this. Like a wife may say, my husband never shaves all weekend. Something like that. Well, why can't we be courteous, mannerly, and also in our dress, in the way we associate with the people in our family? Because what it says is, if I look unkempt, dirty, whatever, I'm saying I don't care. And that may not be the message I really want. Another characteristic of good, wholesome, strong families is appreciation. It's been found by research that members of good families and strong families appreciate one another. They have a feeling of support. The more you invest in a family, the more you're going to protect it, preserve it. The more the family invests in you, the more the family is going to try to protect and preserve, support you. It certainly goes hand in glove, so to speak. But if we are looking at a family, we're looking for loyalty, we're looking for love, we're looking for support, for guidance, in spite of our faults. That's important. We know we don't have perfect families, but that shouldn't keep us from trying to improve on what we have. Also, good families have rituals. They celebrate a holiday, or they have meals together, or they get together, like with me, if I try to sing with my family, fortunately, rest of them can sing, but they put up with my being off key. Special sharing, birthdays, or religious occasions. It's been found by research that strong families do things like that together. It's our thing. It's our time. It's our way of doing it. You walk into the front door of any home and you become aware that how things are done in that family, in that home, may be different from what the same thing may be done in your own family. And so be it. It doesn't make it wrong. It simply makes it different. And we all learn to appreciate, to respect our own homes. Because it's our time in these rituals, that brings up the one about time. In strong families, they spend time together. We hear about quality time these days, but quality has to have quantity. You can't have much quality if you don't have some quantity. I've heard people say, well, after the divorce is settled or something like that, I'll be able to spend more quality time with my children. I just don't see that happening. Sometimes the quality that people are referring to is something like a weekend circus act or something, where the non-custodial parent takes on the party host characteristics and calling that quality time. It may not be that at all. But good families do spend time together and think how easy it is if there is appreciation, if the people in the families enjoy one another. The most frequent visitor to any home in the United States is a relative. Of course, that's part of the family. Another characteristic that we look for and we see is that families are better after a conflict than before. And you may say, well, how does that come about? Well, conflicts sometimes educate. They clarify. They share meanings. They set limits. We express ourselves. We can express ourselves negatively about something we don't like. We can have a genuine conflict about it. But if we express it honestly, without putting down the other, without trying to stand on somebody else's shoulders, then we can turn around and also express positive feelings. Reminds me, I think, of the second research paper I ever did in psychology, golly, a long time ago. But it had to do with that very thing, and I was surprised at the research at the time. I found that people could love better if they could express negative feelings. In other words, the person who bottled up the negatives couldn't seem to find a way of expressing positives either. And another characteristic of strong families is that they have religion. Religion. They believe and they practice it. Are they strong families because they have religion, or do they have religion because they're strong families? I haven't seen any research that really answers a question like that, but they seem to go together. Either way, this is what they find. When you go out to try to find, all across the United States, what are the characteristics of strong families, they seem to practice that religion. Well, do your own research. Walk up and down the street, or your roadway, or whatever, or think about the people you know. How do they act? It doesn't mean that you're going to find perfect families. No. Families sometimes become stronger because of problems. It brings them together. Strong families have a tenacity. They believe in something. They're willing to believe in something. And they're willing for other people to know what they believe in, and they are also willing to put a foot down sometimes. Someone recently talked to me about entitlements in families, because I've used that word. And I had agreed to explain it. An entitlement is what we deserve and what we can expect from being in a family, simply being born in a family. A child is entitled to be protected from harm. It's entitled to be given opportunities to learn within the resources of the parents. It's entitled to learn how to relate emotionally to others, how to become a man or a woman. And this is done by way of the gender roles of the parents. A child is entitled to have the skills and to learn skills and to have the education necessary to recognize the problems in society. Now, a parent is entitled also. A parent is entitled to loyalty, support, respect, and a reasonable effort on the part of the child to learn what the parent is trying to teach. And this is all within the resource level of the parents. And what we see then is the entitlement of one becomes the duty of the other. Yes, both parents and child have duties toward each other. Too often, this is ignored today. We're seeing parents knocking themselves out trying to provide and give to their children every imaginable thing, and they're not expecting the children to give anything back. Well, that's not a reasonable way of approaching it. The parent who expects the child to conform, to have reciprocal relationships and reciprocal obligations, is probably doing a better job. Too often today we see that parents are very busy and they're trying to provide materially what they can't make up emotionally. And maybe the young parent today hasn't had a very good example set for them on how to be a parent. And some of them want very much to be a good parent, but maybe they didn't have a good model. We find that people are working 2 jobs and so on, and wondering what's happening. What's happening? Just look at it a moment. Let's say that most people sleep about 8 hours. And if they have a job, full-time job, they work about 8 hours. Now, what else do they do? Where do they divide the time? Where do they get the time? Commuting to and from work takes a little time. Being married takes a little time. Being a parent takes a little time. Cooking, preparing meals, shopping, cleaning, laundry, typical kinds of domestic work. We see that really, literally, what we hear so often, there aren't enough hours in the day. It may be true, there are not enough hours in the day for people to be a full-time worker, to be a full-time parent, to be relating to marriage, a spouse, and to do the many things that are required in just the ordinary day. And all of what I said, none of it included time to play. Too often we see families booking themselves right out of existence, and they haven't included time to play in their schedule. Too often in marriage counseling we see people who are very conscientious, dedicated, want to do a good job, but they put themselves last on the schedule. And in effect, just move it around a little bit. Why not put yourself first on the schedule? Why not get up in the morning with the intention that I'm going to enjoy the day? In effect, move the decimal point. People say, well, I'll have 0.02 time for play today. Move it over. We can make play out of other things. We can reach and seek enjoyment in many things. Why can't we do that? We can. When we start investing in ourselves that way and investing in each other, then we're going to see better families. We have almost a reverse problem, don't we? That smaller the families today, the less time parents seem to have for their children, and the less time the children have with parents. They're booked and they're scheduled almost out of existence. It's not fair. Why not come back to enjoy the family? If we enjoy the family, then we'll spend more time with it. We start spending more time with it, the family becomes stronger. That's a guarantee. Why not? Until another time, this is Dr. John Middleton. Have a good day. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton, and this is Family Life in the North Country. Today I'd like the topic to be really based on what I found to be a rather provocative, it was a statement, an article, but it was an address given by Dr. William R. Bergman. Dr. Bergman is president of the World Medical Health Foundation, and he gave this talk to the 21st Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C. last November. And the title of the address was AIDS Crisis, Epidemic or Civil Rights Issue. So the topic really is being fair with teens about AIDS. That's the AIDS. We hear a lot about it. And I think to look at it and try to put it in perspective, as Dr. Bergman did, the history of the public health policy. First, it used to be straightforward that the public health policy about sexually transmitted diseases was rather routine. Routine in this way, that if someone had a sexually transmitted disease diagnosed by a physician, it was all very confidential. That there was testing, there was notification of a partner, of course there was treatment. Well, when HIV or AIDS was introduced, no, that changed. No longer did the medical communities practice the same thing. No, they turned their backs on proven medical practices. And I say proven, it wasn't, excuse me, Dr. Bergman's findings or his comments in his presentation. But some of you can recall that we almost had sexually transmitted diseases eliminated in this country for a short time after World War II because of the very vigorous and active pursuit of that policy. It went way down, and then of course it started coming back up. But politics entered the picture with the HIV, the AIDS. It's not even listed in New York State as a contagious disease. Well, if it's not listed as a contagious disease, even though it's totally lethal, there will not be any effort to trace the sources of the illness, even though there is no treatment that's been found. If there is one, there will have to be a change in policy so that people can be traced. One person's civil rights as compared to taking the life of another one. That's not a good trade. Excuse me, well, I'll be right back with you. Yes, thank you. I started to say about the safe sex scenario. The safe sex. In 1980, what the health departments and others were advising was that safe sex was vaginal intercourse, with or without a condom. In 1986, safe sex was to avoid anal intercourse, even though the medical community knew that it was not a safe practice. The medical community knew that it was a viral mucosis transmission, and it was quite clear that condoms were not working. It had to be then another statement came out that a condom had to be latex, that it couldn't be made of other substances. Then we were told not to use an oil-based lubricant. Then the Public Health Service came out and said that there was a 14-point program that we should follow, that anyone should follow. And one of the interesting things was that if a condom is cracked, throw it away. If it's dry, throw it away. If it breaks, of course, throw it away. Well, those were the obvious, the rather perhaps silly things to think about. It became clear that condoms were not safe. The true terminology then was safer sex, not safe sex. Well, in April of 1988, the American Medical Association reported And let me give you the exact quote. Encouraging the use of condoms may in some circumstances even be harmful if it gives a sense of security in a high-risk situation. And the quote goes on, instead of encouraging such couples, parenthesis, where one partner is seropositive, parenthesis close, to use condoms, the best advice may be that they should stop having vaginal intercourse. Strange, isn't it? Dr. Bergman reported that in his visiting with high school students across the United States, he found that most students believed what they were being told. That most students believed that condoms were 99% safe. And when he asked them on what basis that they really could believe such things, he said that most students said, well, the health officials, the health authority, the government, and the schools would not give them bad information. Can you imagine? Looking at the evidence, the FDA, Federal Drug Administration, would not approve condoms as a contraceptive. It wouldn't approve condoms as a contraceptive based on its actual test, that 3 to 17% failure rate within 1 year. Now this was for contraception. Now, if the pregnancy rate is based on, of course, only the female becomes pregnant, and we have to look at the evidence that only fertility can possibly, the maximum days of fertility during a year for a female is 60. And that's maximum. When we look at a failure rate of 3 to 17%, the FDA said no, it could not approve condoms as a means of preventing pregnancy. If it can't be recommended for that, what are we looking at? The sperm is 300 to 400 times larger than the HIV virus. And Dr. Bergman brings this out very clearly. He reports also from a technical journal called Rubber, Chemistry, and Technology. And there he was quoting E.C. Rowland and J.W. Sobieski. And these people reported in that journal article that there were intrinsic defects within latex 100 times the size of the HIV virus that could not be detected in the normal routine screening. They also reported, of course, what everybody knows, that not all condoms are tested, and the other defects in the materials themselves rendered the condom not a safe means of trying to prevent HIV virus from being transmitted. Now, the rubber, chemistry, and technical industry, of course, makes a statement like that. I say that, that's my opinion, that it makes a statement like that in order to avoid the liability. The Family Planning Perspective, which is a publication of Planned Parenthood in February of '92, said the failure rates of students under age 20 was 13.2 to 27.3 after 1 year. Now the failure rate, now think about the failure rate again, that's based on pregnancy. And pregnancy only to the female, and of course only in times of fertility. Now we know that HIV has 365 days to be transmitted, and it can go either way. Now in Dr. Bergman's statements to this leadership conference, he also cited Dr. Margaret Fischel, and Dr. Fischel's study was something that was also reported, but it didn't receive much media coverage, by Dr. William Bennett when he was Secretary of Education, and Dr. who was then the Surgeon General, Coop. Now they reported this same study, and what they found was that They took a group of married people who were to use very conscientiously the condoms for 1 year. One of the partners in each of these couples already had the HIV, was seropositive. At the end of 1 year, what they had then was a transmission of 17%. That was already detected. And we know, since that particular study was published, that sometimes even testing takes a longer period of time than a few months. So within 1 year, we had almost 1 in 6 transfer from one positive partner, the other one became positive. That's almost the same as Russian roulette, isn't it? 1/6, a 6-shot revolver, 1/6 likelihood within 1 year's time of catching HIV. And this is with consistent use of the condom. We look at this sort of thing and we say, how can we really teach young people about safer sex and talk about condoms? The same statistical probability as Russian roulette. It may well be that some of the couples in that study have tested positive since then, because it takes a while for a positive test to come up. What are we really doing? Let's look at the history again and ask ourselves, are we really being fair to young people? First, we had HIV classified in New York State as a research disease. Hasn't been considered a contagious disease yet. We had task force develop educational programs to try to keep AIDS from being spread among young people. So young people in schools were all required to have AIDS education. Now, the people who made up most of the study groups, the largest group rather, of the people in these task forces and study groups were homosexuals. They were the ones most invested with the HIV at the time. Schools were required to develop programs. Every school board in the state was required to develop some kind of program on AIDS education. Well, what we have is the AIDS education has been combined with sex education, and sex education which is based on condom as a way of preventing AIDS really teaches young people not to abstain. It teaches them that perhaps they're missing out if they're not part of this culture that's using condoms. It's a strange sort of thing that we're telling young people. We're teaching our young people a strange set of circumstances. We're not being fair, we're not being honest. If we were to teach anything else, we should teach that the risks are very high and the risks are lethal. People are being given, we've had a lot of publicity about that, they're being given condoms in schools, by the schools themselves. It's an absolute absurdity. Even a federal judge ruled recently in one state that abstinence could not be taught because abstaining from sexual activity, was somehow some kind of religious idea. Well, isn't that peculiar? To me, that sounds downright insane. Now, of course, I've left Dr. Bergman's talk, and that's my opinion, but I think it's insane. We teach young people to abstain from cigarette smoking. We say it's bad for their health. The likelihood of getting cancer is not 1 in 6. It's much, much less. We teach young people to abstain from driving while drunk. We try to teach them to avoid drugs because it's bad for their health. We have quite unmistakably clear evidence about the condoms and its failure rate. But we're not being fair. We're sanctioning schools handing out this kind of false information and in effect promoting it. On the one hand saying, oh, you shouldn't get AIDS, but here, the condom because you can't control yourself. That's not fair to young people. Young people today can control themselves as much as any other young people in any previous generation, if we give them the expectations, if we give them the tools, the confidence that they too can do it. They know they can do it. They're not automatic, autonomon, or robots. They can't respond to their own judgment. They can certainly do so. Somebody out there is not playing with a full deck with the young people. And somebody has a hidden agenda when we do our young people that way. It's grossly unfair. Every society that lasts has things that it believes in. So what if some of the things are religious? There are religions which use fire. There are religions that use alcohol. There are religions that use other things that, taken out of context and misused, may be hazardous to one's health. But saying that abstaining from a dangerous sexual activity is part of religion is a little bit beyond me. Well, someone said, you don't have to go very far to get beyond me, but that's the way it seems to me. Until another time. This is Dr. John Middleton. Have a good day.